Changing the oil on an air-cooled 4-cylinder Suzuki motor like this one is relatively straightforward. However, did you know that there is a second oil filter above the oil pan? Stay tuned and I'll show you how to get to that one and clean it as well. Hello and welcome to another episode on the White Dog Garage YouTube channel. My name is Bob. This episode is another in my occasional motorcycle maintenance series. Once again focused on the air-cooled 4-cylinder Suzuki motor. But what I'm about to show you can equally apply to a number of multi-cylinder Japanese engines, be they Suzuki, Kawasaki, Honda or Yamaha. Changing the oil in these motors is pretty straightforward. Remove the drain plug, sump plug, drain the oil, put the sump plug back in, change the filter, refill the oil, you're good to go. In all these motors there will be another filter that is above the oil pan, and in this episode I'm going to show you how I remove the oil pan in this engine and get at and clean the second filter that these engines have. For Suzuki, they recommend that you change or clean this filter every 10,000 kilometres or 6,000 miles, and that probably goes across the board for most motors. We start by draining the oil. I do this when the oil is warm after a run, because I'm letting it drain whilst I do other things, and also to let the bike cool down. I put a lockout note on the ignition. Basically it's a note on a piece of paper saying there's no oil in the engine and held in the ignition keyway with a pin. Even in a one-man shop stuff happens, so this is just a reminder in case there is a big delay in me getting back to the job. Next job is to remove the exhaust system. Here I have an aftermarket extractor system held on by 2 bolts per header and a single bolt on the muffler, all of which I have to undo. With the system undone, I pull it free and move it to a place out of harm's way. The oil pan is held in place by 15 6mm bolts, and you'll need a 10mm socket to undo them. Steel bolts and old alloy are not a good combination. I like to undo the first turn or two by hand, even if I'm going to use an air tool to finish the job. In this bike the bolts are all the same length, so I pay no heed to their respective positions. With the oil pan off, the oil pickup, which looks like an upside down tank turret with 2 barrels, is clearly visible. The oil pickup is held in by 3 screws. These were originally Phillips head, but I've replaced them with socket head ones. Back at the bench I inspect the plate and the gauze filter and the inside of the oil pickup. A bit of sludge in amongst the plate baffles, as well as the odd fragment lodged in the gauze as seen here, is not that unusual. If the motor is done a fair distance and the oil pan has never been cleaned, fine fragments of aluminium are often seen. This can also be a sign of poor maintenance, often in lockstep with infrequent oil changes and running a bit low on oil. Any large metal fragments or large blockages in the gauze are a cause for concern. Next, I remove the oil filter cartridge. 5 6mm nuts hold it in place, and you'll need a 10mm socket to undo them. The filter cartridge cover plate has a spring behind it. Be careful it does not jump free when the last fastener is removed. I also inspect the filter before discarding. Off camera, I have been to the parts washer and cleaned the filter cartridge cover, oil pickup and the oil pan. I'm now fitting the sump plug to the oil pan. I'm using a new washer, but also adding silicone gasket maker to be doubly sure it won't leak. Just in case you are wondering, the spanner for the sump plug is 21mm. Then I safety wire the sump plug in place. On my own street bikes I do this. You only have to survive a sump plug coming out once on a bike to want to make it a lifelong habit. I don't fit a gasket to the oil pan, but instead use silicone gasket maker to form the seal. Back at the bike, I reinstall the oil pickup using thread locker compound on the screws. The oil pickup can only go on one way with the intake tubes facing forward. If this was an engine in a drag bike, you might also see the pickup modified so as to have a tube running to the rear so that the motor gets maximum oil pickup when the front wheel is in the air. There is an O-ring that goes on the bottom of the oil chamber, which sits between the intake tubes. I lube the O-ring with rubber grease rather than engine oil, as this will hold it in place whilst I refit the oil pan. A final wipe of the mating surface, and then I refit the oil pan. The way that the silicone gasket maker works is that you first do up the fasteners to finger tight, and then about an hour later you tighten to specification. I get them started and then run them up with an air spanner. There are torque values for these 6mm bolts, but I'm using the short spanner done up tight method and work outwards in a spiral pattern starting from the centre line. Then it is on to fitting the cartridge oil filter. Most reputable aftermarket filters come with a choice of 2 replacement O-rings for the cover plate. These are meant to cover a number of engine models, so pick the one that resembles the old one and go for it. Replace the O-ring when you replace the filter is the best advice I can give you. The O-ring needs to be lubricated. I do this by putting some oil in the cover plate recess, fitting the O-ring and then massaging the excess oil into the O-ring. Make sure you refit the spring to the cover plate before installation. Off camera, I've also lubricated the seal on the end of the filter. I fit the filter first and then the cover plate. You'll need to hold the cover plate in against the spring pressure whilst you fit at least 2 nuts to the mounting studs. Then refit the nuts, first till they hit the plate, then tighten the nuts, working around missing every second nut in turn until they are all done up. Again, there are torque values for these nuts, but I'm using the short spanner done up tight method. If you don't have the feel for doing up small fasteners, then please, for the sake of the job, use a torque wrench. Now I am refitting the exhaust system. I clean each of the outlets and then put a bead of copper silicone exhaust sealant around the lip of each outlet. I then refit the exhaust system, bolting it loosely in place at first. With it all fitted in place, I then go back and fit the remaining bolts and remove and refit the loose bolts as well, coating all of the threads of each bolt in turn with copper anti-seize lubricant. Whilst doing this, I have propped up the exhaust collector and only fully bolt up the muffler once the header bolts are all done up. Finally, I refill the engine oil up to the top of the sight glass. Once I restart the motor, this level will drop as the oil fills the filter and associated chambers. I will then add more oil to bring it back to the full mark. With the oil topped up, it is now time to remove the lockout nut, and all that remains to do is start the bike, check for leaks and top up the oil to the correct full level. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I'd welcome a thumbs up, and please share it widely. If you are into making stuff, fixing stuff, maintaining stuff, or restoration of stuff, this is the channel for you. And if you haven't already subscribed, think about subscribing. It's simple. Hit the bar down below, and don't forget to ding the bell so that you're reminded every time a new video comes out. Thank you.